Daisy, your contract was terminated this morning. Leave. That was the text waiting for me at 8:57 a.m. Sharp, short, clinical, cowardly. I stared at it while the elevator doors closed, sealing me in chrome and silence. My reflection looked back. Black blazer, hair perfectly pinned, the same pearl earrings my grandmother used to say were meant for a woman who knew her worth. I didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Instead, I slid my phone into my pocket and pressed the button for floor 27, boardroom level, the place where decisions were made. Or, if my plan held, the place where decisions would be undone. I still remember my first day here. I was 27, fresh out of grad school, and the CEO shook my hand like he already owned my future. "You're going to do big things here, Daisy," he'd said. Back then, I believed him. Now, 8 years later, that same man couldn't even bother to fire me face-to-face cute. At 9:01 a.m., the elevator chimed. I stepped out and felt the energy shift immediately. Not the dramatic kind. No hushed whispers or gasps. But the subtle kind. The kind that comes from people suddenly avoiding eye contact, from conversations ending half a second too fast. People always underestimate silence. Silence tells you everything. My heels echoed down the hallway. Steady, controlled, intentional. A rhythm drummed tight with tension. As I approached the boardroom, the glass walls reflected faces already seated inside. Executives, board members, and Brandon, our newly promoted CFO, whose ego barely fit inside the building. He was the reason I got that text. The golden boy, the CEO's protege, the man who thought titles equaled intelligence, or power, or both. I opened the boardroom door without knocking. Every head snapped toward me. Brandon choked on air. "D. Daisy?" His voice cracked. "You're not supposed to be here." I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a friendly one. The kind you give right before checkmate. "Oh? That's interesting," I said calmly. "My calendar says otherwise." Let me be clear. I wasn't surprised by the firing. I'd seen it coming 3 months ago, sudden secret meetings. Missing email access I previously had. My name disappearing from invitation lists I used to be required in. The soft betrayal always comes quietly. Not like thunder, but like humidity. You don't notice until you can't breathe. So I prepared. Quietly. Precisely. Relentlessly. Because the first rule of corporate survival is simple. Never let someone take from you what they didn't build with you. Back in the boardroom, Brandon exchanged a panicked look with the CEO. Yes, she, looked irritated, like I was an inconvenience, not a threat. "Daisy," she exhaled, standing. "You were notified. You're no longer—" I interrupted her. Not loudly, not aggressively, just efficiently. "I'll stay." A few people winced. People who knew me well enough to recognize that tone. The CEO stiffened. "This is a closed executive meeting." "It is," I agreed, walking toward my seat. The one I'd sat in every Monday for 3 years. And I am still an executive. Brandon barked a laugh. Not because he thought it was funny, but because panic has to escape somehow. "No, Daisy. You were terminated this morning. HR is packaging your—" The door burst open. The company's senior lawyer, Harold Finch, gray suit, sweating, holding a laptop like it was radioactive, stumbled inside. His eyes landed on me. He froze. "Ma'am," he breathed, voice cracking. "That's your authorization on the buyout agreement." The room went still. No one moved. No one spoke. Brandon turned pale. The CEO blinked, confused, then furious. "That's impossible," she snapped. "She doesn't have the authority." Harold shook his head. "She does." He swallowed. Hard. "The transfer paperwork is valid. Timestamp verified. Internal registry confirmed." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loud. Heavy. I sat down. Slowly. Gracefully. Like the seat had always belonged to me. The CEO slammed her palm against the table. Call forensics now. People jolted like they'd been shocked. I simply folded my hands. By all means, I murmured. Call whoever you need. Because while they scrambled, while they panicked, while they tried to undo what had already been sealed in ink, timestamp, and legal protocol, I already knew the truth. This wasn't the day they fired me. This was the day I stopped working for them and started taking back what they tried to steal. And by 1 p.m., they would understand something they should have known all along. You never underestimate the woman who built the system. The first person to break after the CEO's outburst wasn't Brandon. It was the board chair. Elaine Wu. Sharp. Calculated. A woman who rarely reacted to emotional chaos. She leaned forward, hands clasped, voice calm enough to slice through panic. Harold, she said, addressing the lawyer. Explain. Slowly. You could have heard dust settle. Harold adjusted his glasses, opened the laptop, and turned the screen toward the board. The system shows a triggering event, he said. Stamped at 8:04 this morning. He swallowed. Tied to a dormant executive buyout clause. The CEO scoffed. We never approved any dormant buyout clause. But Harold didn't look at her. He looked at me, because he remembered. 6 years ago, long before Brandon strutted into his CFO role, long before restructuring and vision realignment, the company nearly collapsed. A failed merger, crumbling morale, lawsuits threatening to swallow us whole. Back then, I wasn't just an analyst. I was the person they handed everything messy and whispered, fix it so I did. I streamlined redundancies, rebuilt contract language, and, most importantly, I added protective mechanisms no one read because everyone was too panicked to care. Because sometimes protecting a corporation means protecting its backbone, and at that time, that backbone was me. Elaine tapped the table once. Harold, continue. He exhaled. The clause states, if the employee named is terminated without due process and without board approval, ownership rights default to her as interim controlling shareholder until a full review. A beat. Then another. You could see the recognition spread across faces like wildfire, finally touching dry brush. They hadn't fired me properly. They thought a text message was enough. I didn't smile. Not yet. Not here. The CEO finally found words. That clause can't just activate. It must require board signatures. Arbitration review. Harold shook his head. It would, normally. He clicked one line on the screen. A scanned document filled the projector behind them. Clean, crisp, numbered, initialed my initials. And two others, Elaine's and the CEO's, dated years ago. No one breathed. Brandon shot up from his chair the way a person leaps from a chair they thought was stable. This is absurd, he snapped. No one is giving her control of executive shares because of some ancient panic clause. Elaine's gaze shifted to him, not angry, but disappointed. Brandon, she said softly, you signed the termination order without board review. You did that. Silence dropped so heavy it felt like gravity thickened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't look. I already knew what it was. A system alert. Ownership routing confirmed. The CEO leaned forward, eyes sharp. Daisy, she said, voice smooth now. Too smooth. There must be a misunderstanding. If we reverse the termination... I raised a hand. No. Her smile faltered. Brandon scoffed. Don't get emotional. We can fix this. I finally looked at him. Brandon, I said, calm as still water. The only reason you're panicking is because you thought you won. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because the worst weapon in a room full of egos isn't anger. It's certainty. Elaine cleared her throat, the moderator returning. What documentation triggered the clause, Harold? He scrolled. A digital authorization uploaded from Daisy's credentials at 7:59 a.m. today. Brandon pounced. She sabotaged the system then. But Harold shook his head again. No, the protocol requires pre-existing authorization, notarized verification, and independent witness logging. All 3 checks passed. The CEO's voice was barely audible. Meaning? Harold closed the laptop. Meaning nothing about this was forged. Nothing was added after the fact. A pause. She didn't trigger it today. She set it up years ago. It simply executed when the conditions you created were met. Someone in the back whispered, very softly, "Oh my God." Finally, I spoke. Not loudly, not with heat, just truth. 6 months ago, you started reducing my access. 3 faces flushed. You removed me from strategy meetings, then from financial oversight, then from legal queue review. I leaned back slightly. That told me everything. You were preparing to replace me quietly, without severance, without recognition, without accountability. No one contradicted me. They couldn't. And when people show you they don't value you, I continued, you don't beg them to change. My voice lowered. You make sure they can't erase you. For a long moment, no one dared speak. Then Elaine turned toward me. "Daisy," she said carefully, "what do you intend to do now?" My pulse didn't spike. My breath didn't shake. My answer had been waiting long before this day arrived. "I intend," I said, "to ensure this company stops treating its people like disposable tools." The CEO swallowed hard, finally understanding. This wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And consequences, unlike apologies, can't be undone. The boardroom didn't erupt the way people imagine. There was no shouting match, no dramatic walkouts, no thrown papers. The real fallout was quieter, tighter, more dangerous. Shock isn't loud. It's still. The CEO finally sank into her leather chair, spine rigid, jaw clamped. She wasn't just angry. She was calculating. I knew that look. The same one predators use when prey unexpectedly bites back, Elaine remained composed, hands folded neatly, watching the room. Not to understand what was happening, but to see who would break first. It was Brandon. Of course. "So what?" he snapped, pacing now. "She gets temporary control because of a loophole? We can still challenge this. We can fight it." Harold didn't look up from his laptop as he muttered, "You can challenge it, but contesting a verified clause will require a public filing." Brandon stopped mid-step. "A public filing?" The CEO repeated, voice low. Harold nodded. "Yes, SEC review, media inquiry, shareholder disclosure." Silence again. Heavier now. This wasn't just about me. This was about exposure. Corporate decisions whispered in hallways, undisclosed bonuses, questionable advancements. Suddenly at risk, Brandon swallowed hard. That could sink stock projections. Harold nodded once. "And if the clause stands, and it will, that means she retains administrative control while the courts review it." "So she runs the company while we challenge?" Brandon hissed. "No," Harold corrected, finally meeting his eyes. "She owns it." I watched panic settle across their faces. Not dramatic, not chaotic, but internal. The kind that rearranges someone's understanding of reality. The CEO finally spoke. Quiet but sharp. "What exactly do you want, Daisy?" Not the question of a leader. The question of someone negotiating with a threat. I met her eyes. "I want an honest conversation. Something I haven't received here in months." She scoffed. "You were never excluded. We were restructuring." "No," I said, voice steady. "You were eliminating anyone who didn't serve your new hierarchy. Anyone who could question you." Her expression wavered, just enough to confirm it. Brandon crossed his arms. "So what? Now you're going to rewrite the rules? Fire everyone? Replace leadership?" It was tempting. Too easy. But vengeance wasn't why I walked in here. "You think this is about humiliation?" I said slowly. "About getting even. but I didn't fight my way to the table to burn the building down. I paused. I fought because people like you assume loyalty should come without respect. His jaw tightened. Good. That landed. Elaine shifted forward slightly, directing the conversation. Daisy, if this clause stands, you have authority to take immediate action. But I need clarity. Are you stepping into leadership or simply holding the position until review? I knew the answer before she finished speaking. I'm stepping in. No hesitation. No apology. I'd already done the work for years, just without the title. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed again. This time I checked. A notification from the internal compliance portal. System alert. Ownership transfer registration complete. Another line. New permissions assigned. Full administrative access reinstated. I placed the phone face down on the table, then looked around the room. Slowly, letting the weight of the moment stand. You tried to remove me quietly, I said, and I responded quietly. A beat. But now that the process is legal and public, we will proceed transparently. The CEO exhaled through her teeth, part anger, part acceptance. What happens next? She asked. I didn't soften. There will be an internal audit of leadership decisions from the last 12 months. Brandon paled. And until the audit is complete, I continued, no executive terminations, promotions, financial reallocations, or restructuring changes will move forward. The CEO tapped the table once. Not agreement, not resistance, just acknowledgement. Finally, Elaine stood. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning with a full legal outline. Daisy, until then, you are acting chair. Brandon whispered something under his breath. I heard it anyway. She was never supposed to win. I turned toward him, calm, collected, unshaken. I didn't win. My voice stayed low, measured. You just lost because you underestimated the wrong person. As the board members stood and slowly filed out, no one looked at me with dismissal anymore. They looked with calculation, recognition, unease, respect. I gathered my pen, just one, placed it neatly in my bag, and stood. 9 hours earlier, they thought they could erase me with a message. Now, before noon, the company wasn't just listening. It was mine. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and tomorrow the real work would start. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of adrenaline or fear, but because power changes things. People, dynamics, plans. And overnight, the quiet rumble of what happened spread through the company like electricity through exposed wire. No announcement had been made yet, but offices have their own nervous system. Whispers, Slack messages, private group chats, calendar updates disappearing without explanation. By morning, everyone knew something. Just not which way gravity now tilted. I arrived at the building at 8:12 a.m., not early, not late, precisely as I always had. My badge, once deactivated, now unlocked the doors so fast the scanner beeped twice. A subtle apology from the system. In the lobby, employees glanced up at me in quick, darted movements. Some confused, some curious, others worried. People remember who stood with them. People also remember who didn't. As I reached the elevator, a voice called softly behind me. Daisy? I turned. It was Mia, junior data analyst, barely mid-20s, always the first one in and the last one out, holding this company together in ways leadership never noticed. She clutched a blue folder like a lifeline. Her voice trembled. I heard you... Well, I don't know what I heard. Is it true? I held her gaze. That depends. What version did you hear? That they tried to fire you, she whispered. And now you're running things? She didn't say it with fear. She said it with hope. I nodded once. I'm acting chair until review. Possibly longer. Her shoulders dropped. Not in relief, but in something close to vindication. That's good, she said quietly. You're fair. Then after a beat, Most of us needed that. She didn't wait for a response. She walked away before confidence could betray her. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, feeling the shift. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was responsibility. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. When I walked in at 8:59, the room was already full. No one ignored me now. Elaine acknowledged me with the smallest nod. The CEO avoided eye contact. Brandon looked like someone had swallowed his confidence and left him with the shell. Harold cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to confirm for the record that the ownership transfer has passed legal verification and cannot be overturned without court-mandated cause." He looked at me. "And there is no cause." Silence. Then Elaine turned to me. "Daisy, the floor is yours." The gravity of that sentence wasn't lost on anyone I stood, not dramatically, just deliberately, and placed a printed folder at the center of the table. "A year ago," I began, "employee satisfaction surveys were quietly archived instead of reviewed." A flicker of surprise moved across the CEO's face. "Yes," I continued, "I know about that. And yes, I know why." I clicked the remote and a screen illuminated behind me. Graphs, timelines, reports. This company was built on innovation, I continued, but somewhere along the way, leadership shifted focus, from building value to protecting seats. No one spoke. "The restructuring wasn't about improving operations," I said softly. "It was about eliminating challenge, eliminating dissent, eliminating anyone who remembered how the company was built." Brandon exhaled sharply, defensive. "Now wait." "No," I cut in, firm, not loud. "You will have time to speak, but right now, you will listen." His mouth closed, and this time, he stayed quiet. I clicked again. A new slide. Turnover statistics. Compensation disparities. Executive bonuses during layoffs. Mia's team listed among the lowest paid departments. "This board has forgotten the most basic principle of leadership," I said. "People don't work for companies, they work for people they trust." For the first time, the CEO looked directly at me. Not angry, but exposed. "So here's what will happen." I placed both hands on the table. Effective immediately, all ongoing restructuring will pause. An independent audit will begin, focusing on financial decisions and compliance. Elaine nodded. Approval, not obligation. "We will also begin department evaluations, not to eliminate roles, but to understand what support has been ignored." A few board members shifted, uncomfortable. Good. Growth was never comfortable. "And finally," I added, "HR will no longer report exclusively to executive leadership. They will report to the board, specifically through me, until ethical standards are confirmed." The CEO's jaw tightened. "You're dismantling the system," she murmured. I met her eyes, steady, unflinching. "No," I said softly. "I'm rebuilding the one we promised when we hired people who believed in us." For a long moment, the room held still. Not resistance, not acceptance. Just processing. Then Elaine spoke quietly, almost with relief. "Motion to proceed under Daisy's outlined mandate?" Hands raised, one by one, even the CEO's. Brandon's was the last, slow, reluctant, but it lifted, motion passed. As the room emptied, Elaine paused beside me. "You know," she said, "most people who get power this suddenly use it to destroy." I looked at her. Maybe that's why most leaders aren't remembered for the right reasons. She smiled. Not big, not soft, just real. "We'll see who you become." I nodded once. "We will." Because tomorrow wasn't going to be the fight. It would be the rebuild. And rebuilds always revealed the truth. Who deserved power and who only wanted it. 3 weeks later, the company looked the same from the outside. Same glass windows, same navy blue lobby, same front desk orchid that somehow never died. But inside, everything had shifted. The audit confirmed what most employees already suspected: selective promotions, favoritism, silenced complaints, and financial decisions that benefited a handful at the top while entire departments struggled. No crimes. Nothing criminally prosecutable. Just something worse. Neglect. The kind of leadership that drains potential. Not with violence, but with indifference. And cleaning that up wasn't exciting. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a dramatic boardroom explosion like the day everything changed. It was paperwork meetings, listening, uncomfortable truths. The real work began after the shock wore off. On a rainy Thursday morning, the final audit report was delivered to the board. Elaine opened the meeting. "Today," she said, "we vote on whether Daisy remains in permanent leadership capacity as chair and acting CEO. No dramatics, no raised voices, just procedure." Brandon looked different, flatter somehow, like someone removed the scaffolding holding up his ego. He hadn't spoken much since the clause activated. The CEO sat beside him, still sharp, still composed, but quieter. I didn't speak until the floor opened. "When you fired me," I began, "you didn't do it because I failed." No one interrupted. "You did it because I made you uncomfortable." The CEO's expression tightened, not in anger, but recognition. "You wanted someone compliant," I continued, "someone who wouldn't question decisions, someone who would sign silently and disappear when it was convenient." I paused. But companies don't survive on compliance. They survive on integrity. The room remained still, absorbing that truth. Then I placed a single sheet of paper at the center of the table. "My decision," I said, "is not to remove either of you." Both heads snapped up. Brandon blinked. The CEO looked stunned. "People make bad decisions when they're afraid," I continued. "This company has been operating in fear. Fear of financial losses, fear of accountability, fear of change." I met each board member's eyes. "So instead of punishment, we rebuild culture. Transparency, shared leadership, ethical operations." Elaine exhaled. Not relief exactly, but respect. "You want reform," she said quietly. "No," I corrected. "I want accountability and growth." Voting began. One by one, hands lifted, steadier than before. When it came to Brandon, he hesitated, then finally said, "Yes." Soft, but real. The CEO lifted her hand last. Not because she resisted, but because she was processing something heavier. This company wasn't slipping through her fingers. It was finally becoming what she once hoped it could be, before ego, pressure, and ambition distorted it. "Yes," she said. Motion passed. Unanimous. After the meeting, most people filtered out quickly. Politics exhausted them, but the CEO remained seated. She finally looked at me. Not as a threat, not as a rival, but as an equal. "You could have ended my career," she said. I nodded. "Yes. And you didn't. I don't believe leadership should behave like revenge." She let out a breath. "Then why fight back at all?" I considered my answer carefully. "Because silence teaches people how to treat you." A slow, genuine smile tugged at her mouth. Not approval, but understanding. "You're going to be good at this," she said. "I already am," I replied. Not boastful, just true. On my way out, I passed Mia in the hallway, sorting through spreadsheets and highlighters. She straightened when she saw me. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. I smiled. "For the first time?" I said. "Yes." She nodded. Slow, hopeful, good. We needed someone who sees us. Not manages, not uses, not survives through us. Sees us. Her words stayed with me long after she walked away. Later that evening, I stood in my office, my actual office now, and watched the city through rain-speckled glass. I thought about that text message, the one meant to erase me. "Daisy, your contract was terminated this morning. Leave." Funny. It was the message that pushed everything into motion. The message that forced a system built on fear and silence to finally face itself. The message that reminded me of the most important truth I'd forgotten. Power isn't given. Power is claimed. And sometimes, power is reclaimed. At 9 a.m., they tried to end my story. By 1 p.m., I wasn't just still here. I owned the narrative, and I wasn't going anywhere. I stared at him for a full 3 seconds, wondering if I'd misheard, or if the founder's son had finally inhaled enough vape smoke to kill the last surviving brain cell in his skull. My girlfriend is taking your office and your position. Be out by noon. He said it with the confidence of a man who once microwaved aluminum foil and blamed the microwave. I burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle. No. The kind of laugh that erupts when life becomes so stupid it circles back to comedy. Good luck, then, I replied, grabbing my coffee and walking past him like he was a speed bump someone painted gold and called valuable. Behind me, I could feel his confusion crackle. I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking back. Because here's the thing. I already knew this company was headed straight for a flaming train wreck. They just didn't know I was the airbag they were about to remove. Let me rewind. I'd been with Harbor Tech Logistics for 9 years. 9 years of cleaning up messes, ensuring legal compliance, translating nonsense into workable procedures, and keeping regulators from breathing down our necks. 9 years of late nights, missing birthdays, fixing disaster after disaster created by rich men who believed compliance was optional and consequences didn't apply to them. The founder, William Hale, used to respect me. Then his son, Tanner, MBA from My Dad Paid for This University, returned from Bali with a tan, a bracelet made of shells, and a girlfriend he called Visionary. Her real name was Sabrina, but she preferred to introduce herself as Bree, with an I, not a Y. Y's are chaotic energy. She posted affirmations on Instagram like, "Girl boss isn't a mindset, it's a frequency," and "Money flows effortlessly to those aligned with luxury," which was bold, considering she didn't have a job until Tanner decided she deserved mine. The meeting where they announced this was supposed to be a leadership transition. That's what the calendar invite said. I walked into the glass conference room expecting a restructuring announcement. Instead, I got Tanner, leaning back in his chair like a bargain bin Bond villain, and Sabrina perched beside him in a fur jacket inside, sipping iced matcha and kicking her heels against the chair like a toddler. "So," Tanner began, smiling like he just solved world hunger, "we're moving the company into a new era. Fresh, bold, modern. And we want leadership to reflect that." Sabrina's voice had that influencer softness that made everything sound like a sponsored meditation app. "It's nothing personal, Ellen. We just feel your energy doesn't align with where Harbor Tech is going." My energy. Right. My energy. The energy that kept us legal when Tanner once tried to classify warehouse forklift drivers as creative subcontractors to avoid payroll taxes. I waited for Tanner to blink first. He didn't. So I stood, gathered my things, my planner, my certifications, my beloved worn-in mug, and walked out. No begging, no arguing, no scene. But inside, my brain whispered one sentence. They have no idea what they just did. What Tanner and Bree didn't know was that 12 days earlier, after months of ignored warnings, unanswered emails, and compliance violations, so reckless they could wake the dead. I filed a formal withdrawal as the designated regulatory officer stamped, notarized, logged, legally airtight. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I wasn't going to prison, because Tanner thought OSHA was a vibe killer, and environmental permits were optional if no one complains. And here's the fun part. When a company in our industry loses its compliance officer, the system gives them 30 days to appoint a new one. Day 30 was tomorrow. So the next morning, I sat in my car across the street with a cappuccino and watched it unfold like live theater. At exactly 8:04 a.m., a city inspector in a navy jacket walked up to the front entrance, pulled out a rolled red notice, and taped it to the glass "Operations Suspended." Behind him, employees gathered like ducks watching a magician pull a grenade instead of a rabbit. Then Tanner sprinted outside, sleep hair, untied shoes, panic already sweating through his shirt. He read the notice. His face went pale. Then he screamed, "What did you do?" To the inspector, to the universe, to the ghost of common sense that abandoned him years ago. And I sat there, sipping my coffee, smiling. Because this wasn't revenge. This was accountability. And accountability hits different when it finally arrives. Tanner stood there on the sidewalk like a malfunctioning statue, staring at the red notice taped to the glass. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. Just a faint wheeze, like his soul was trying to escape. Inside, employees hovered behind the glass wall, eyes wide, hands over mouths, phones recording. Someone whispered, loud enough that I heard through my car window. "Oh my God, she warned them." No one said my name, but they didn't have to. Guilt recognizes the person it failed. And in that moment, watching Tanner frantically tap the locked door like it would magically unseal if he pushed hard enough, something inside me finally unclenched. 9 years of stress, swallowed opinions, quiet competence, and cleaning up other people's recklessness finally paid off. Now, to be clear, I didn't tank the company. They tanked themselves. I just stopped holding up the collapsing beams. Because for the last year, Harbor Tech had been playing Russian roulette with government regulations. And every time I tried to intervene, I got brushed off with, "We'll handle it later." Stop being dramatic. Compliance is fear-based thinking. Or my personal favorite from Sabrina. Rules are a social construct. Sweetheart, so is prison, but it's still very real. Let's rewind about 3 months. Harbor Tech had landed a major contract with the State Port Authority, a big one. Multi-year, high scrutiny, involving hazardous storage and interstate logistics. Meaning, everything had to be airtight. Reports, audits, certifications, all filed on time. And for the first 6 months, I kept everything on track. Barely. Because while I was doing my job, Tanner was busy creating culture, which meant beanbag chairs in the lounge, motivational posters that said things like "chaos means progress," and mandatory team-building sessions involving blindfolds and kombucha shots. Meanwhile, our compliance inbox looked like missing documentation, outstanding audit, schedule overdue, legal follow-up required. Every ignored message wasn't just a loose thread, it was a fuse. The turning point came one evening at 10:14 p.m. I was at my desk, finishing revisions for the environmental impact renewal, when an email popped up from the Compliance Review Board. Urgent. Final notice before enforcement action. That wasn't a warning. That was the last step before consequences. I forwarded it to Tanner, the founder, and Sabrina, who by then was already unofficially involved in decisions she had no qualifications for. 5 minutes later, Sabrina replied, "No punctuation, no greeting. Can this wait until after the lunar retreat? I'm not in a mental space for stress or in a compliance violation threatening hundreds of jobs and millions in contracts." And she wanted to wait until after her yoga retreat. I stared at the screen until the absurdity settled into certainty. They weren't going to take responsibility. So I stopped absorbing the impact. 2 weeks later, after documenting every warning, every missed deadline, every red flag, I contacted my attorney. Not to sue. Not yet. Just to ask one question. If a company ignores compliance responsibilities and refuses to act, am I legally obligated to stay responsible for consequences? His answer? No, but you need to resign officially, with proof, signatures, and time-stamped filings, and make sure you keep records. So I did. Signed. Notarized. Uploaded. Certified. I notified leadership. I sent the withdrawal notice to legal. I even included the reference codes and compliance deadlines they needed to meet to stay operational. No drama, No revenge plan. Just a boundary. And every single person in that chain either skimmed it, ignored it, or assumed I was bluffing. Back in the present, Tanner finally stopped slapping the locked glass door and spun toward the inspector. His voice cracked like a teenager denied concert tickets. There has to be a mistake. We have a compliance officer. The inspector, mid-50s, government badge, coffee cup that said, "Don't confuse Google with my degree." Didn't blink. No registered compliance officer has been assigned since April. Under state statute 9-14-B, operating without one is grounds for immediate suspension. Tanner blinked. Okay, well, how do we fix it? The inspector shrugged, not unkindly. You appoint someone qualified. Submit documentation. Pass review. Could take weeks, months, depending on penalties. Months? Tanner squeaked. Possibly longer. Inside the building, someone gasped. Another person quietly sat down on the floor. And Sabrina, yes, she was there now, whispered loudly enough for the street to hear, "Wait, is this because Ellen left?" The inspector looked at her, confused. But I knew. Everyone did. HarborTech wasn't spoiled by bad luck. It was collapsing under the weight of ignored responsibility. And whether they liked it or not, I wasn't coming back to catch them. By noon, the news had spread through the building faster than free donuts. HarborTech's doors remained sealed. The red suspension notice, bright against the glass like a warning label on poison employees, drifted in small clusters outside the sidewalk, whispering, texting, calling spouses, pacing like people waiting for bad medical results. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, Tanner vanished. Not physically. No, he was still inside. But mentally, he was gone. His swagger was replaced with the posture of a man trying to remember if crying was allowed in corporate leadership handbooks. I watched all of this from across the street with a sandwich and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you followed the rules, and someone else didn't. My phone buzzed. It was Maria, one of the analysts who used to work under me. "Ellen, did you know this was coming?" I stared at the message. Did I know? Yes. Did I cause it? No. I just stopped being the human firewall between incompetence and consequence. I typed back. I warned them more than once. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Maria, they're saying you sabotaged the company." I let out a small laugh. Quiet, tired, unsurprised me. If telling the truth counts as sabotage, maybe they shouldn't have lied to themselves. She heart-reacted the message. No follow-up. People always assume revenge requires action. Sometimes revenge is simply stepping away and letting people experience the results of their own decisions. By early afternoon, the founder arrived. I knew he was coming before I saw him, because the energy shifted. Conversations died. Employees straightened. The air got heavier. William Hale stepped out of a black SUV, posture rigid, face set like concrete. He didn't rush. He walked toward the entrance with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who hated surprises and hated public embarrassment. Even more. He stopped in front of the red notice, read it, then read it again. He didn't swear. He didn't yell. He just exhaled, long and slow, the sound of someone realizing exactly how much had been ignored. Finally, he turned to the inspector. "What do we need to do?" he asked, voice steady but sharp. The inspector lifted the clipboard. "First step, assign a new designated compliance officer." Silence stretched. Then Tanner appeared beside him. Hair messy, face flushed, expression equal parts fear and hope. "Dad, I can fix this," he insisted. "I just need her paperwork." "Her?" The founder stared at him. "Who?" Tanner cleared his throat. "Ellen." Like the name physically hurt to say. The founder blinked. "Ellen doesn't work here anymore." Tanner shifted. "I thought she'd still help." The founder turned his head slowly, like he feared he might snap something if he moved too fast. "You fired her." "No, Tanner said quickly. I replaced her. With who? And there she was, Sabrina, standing half behind Tanner, holding a designer tote bag like a shield. She lifted her hand in a small wave. Hi, she said softly. We haven't officially met. The founder closed his eyes. Not dramatically, just like he needed a moment of silence for his own sanity. When he looked at Tanner again, there was no yelling, just cold clarity. You replaced our compliance officer, he said flatly, with your girlfriend. She's not just my girlfriend. Tanner started, but the founder cut him off. What are her certifications? Sabrina blinked. Certifications? He stared. You replaced a state-registered compliance specialist with someone who doesn't know what a certification is. Sabrina's face flushed pink. I'm very motivated, she whispered. The founder looked like he aged 5 years and 5 seconds. He didn't speak again. Not to the inspector, not to Tanner, not to anyone. He simply turned and walked back toward his SUV. My phone buzzed again. It was a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Ellen speaking, I answered. There was a pause. Then, Ellen. The founder's voice. Controlled, crisp. Familiar. We need to talk. I said nothing. He continued. I made a mistake letting certain decisions go unchecked. I'm asking you, professionally, to come in and help us correct this. I stared at the building, at the sealed doors, at the silent employees, at Tanner pacing like a caged animal. Then I said, I'm willing to meet, but I'm not walking back in there. He exhaled. Tell me where. I looked across the street at the cafe with wood tables and decent coffee. The same place I had sat that morning, watching everything collapse, I smiled. Across the street, I said. Bring a notebook. He agreed. And as I hung up, one truth settled in. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of accountability. And maybe, just maybe, a reckoning. The founder arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. That alone told me everything. This wasn't a negotiation born from pride. It was one born from urgency and consequence, the kind that strips titles and ego, leaving only reality. He spotted me in the corner booth, the same seat where I had watched the implosion unfold. He approached quietly, not with the booming presence he used to command, but with the careful steps of someone approaching a loaded trap. Ellen, he said, nodding respectfully. William, I replied. We sat. No small talk. No apology. Not yet. Just silence and the weight of what wasn't said. Finally, he spoke. I reviewed the suspension notice and the compliance backlog. I nodded. I'm sure that was illuminating. He let out a breath. Not quite a sigh. I didn't realize how much of this rested on you. And there it was. Not acknowledgement. Not gratitude. Awakening. I leaned back slightly. I told the team multiple times we were on unstable ground. I know, he said quietly. I read the emails. He paused. All of them. He didn't say what he must have realized. He had ignored every warning until it was too late. A server appeared with 2 coffees. He didn't touch his. I sipped mine. So, he said finally, folding his hands on the table, I need you to return, temporarily, to help us undo this situation. There was no arrogance in his tone now, just necessity. I nodded once. I'll consider it, but I'm not coming back under the same structure. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Not offended, just listening. All right, he said. Tell me what you want. I didn't rush. If there's one thing corporate environments teach you, it's that silence is a language. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. First, I'm not your employee. I'll return as an external consultant. He nodded slowly. Second, I set my own hours. I am not on call, and I'm not available for panic-driven demands at midnight. Another nod. Third, I work directly with you. Not Tanner, not Sabrina, not anyone else trying to cosplay leadership. This time, he didn't nod immediately. His jaw tightened just slightly, but then, agreed. And finally, I said, meeting his eyes, my rate. He leaned back. Name it. I slid a paper across the table. He read it. His eyebrows shot upward. That's higher than what we paid you salary for a year. That's because, I said, taking another sip, I'm not here to fix small mistakes. I'm here to save you from a state-level shutdown and breach of contract lawsuits. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply folded the paper, tucked it into his suit jacket, and said, "Send the formal agreement." I'll sign. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked what I knew was coming. Why didn't you tell me directly? I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't clueless. He wasn't incompetent. He was guilty of something far more common in leadership: delegation without oversight. You didn't want to hear it, I said calmly. And your son made sure nothing reached you unless it fit his narrative. His jaw clenched. And Sabrina? He asked. I almost smiled. She thinks regulations are negotiable, and she believed that because Tanner never corrected her. He closed his eyes for a moment. Processing, recalibrating. When he opened them, there was something new there. Humility. Ellen, he said, voice lower. If I had known. I held up a hand. Knowing wasn't the issue. Listening was. He nodded once. Not defensively, not reluctantly, but in acceptance. Before he left, he said one more thing. Thank you for not letting this get worse. I met his gaze. I didn't save the company, I saved myself. What happens to HarborTech now depends on whether anyone finally learns the difference between leadership and entitlement. He absorbed that with a slow, thoughtful nod. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and left. As soon as he stepped outside, my phone buzzed again. This time, not from an employee, from Tanner. A single message. We need to talk. Please. I stared at it, expression flat. For years, Tanner treated compliance as something beneath him. Something boring, restrictive, bothersome. Now it was the only thing standing between him and a disaster with his name on it. I typed a reply. Schedule it through your father. I don't discuss business over text. I hit send. Set the phone down. And finished my coffee. Because for the first time in 9 years, they needed me more than I needed them. And that shift was only the beginning. By the end of the week, HarborTech looked less like a company and more like a hospital waiting room after a disaster. Quiet, tense, everyone pretending everything was fine while knowing it absolutely wasn't. I walked in Monday morning, not as staff, not as someone desperate to prove value, but as a contracted specialist with a laptop bag, a calm expression, and full control of the situation. The red notice was still taped to the door, but inside, the energy had shifted. People straightened when they saw me, not out of fear, but relief. Someone whispered, "Thank God she's here." Funny how quickly reputation transforms once people realize competence is not a personality type. It's a lifeline. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the founder called the leadership meeting to order. Tanner sat at the conference table. Hair brushed, posture stiff, expression somewhere between apology and ego, desperately clinging to relevance. Sabrina was beside him, but noticeably quieter, arms crossed, staring at her phone like she wished she could manifest herself into another dimension. I placed a thick binder on the table. Audits, violations, deadlines, solutions. Tanner swallowed hard. All of that is because of me? No, I said calmly. It's because of leadership decisions that ignored responsibility. His cheeks flushed. That's the same thing. I nodded. Exactly. Then I started. Not with blame, though there was plenty to assign, but with structure. Here's what happens if we do nothing, I said, flipping the first page. Fines, contract termination, civil penalties, and a mandatory 2-year operational freeze. Sabrina let out a tiny squeak. 2 years? You mean like, shut down? I nodded once. Correct. She stared at Tanner like he had personally unplugged oxygen from a life support machine. I continued. Here's what happens if we fix it. Audit submitted, documentation corrected, training implemented, a new compliance committee formed, with actual qualified oversight. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. The room listened. Really listened. For the first time in months. After outlining the recovery plan, I slid a second document across the table. This is an acknowledgement of leadership negligence, signed by executive officers. The founder read it with a steady expression. Tanner, however, froze. You expect me to sign something admitting I messed up? No, I replied smoothly. I expect you to sign something stating the truth. His jaw clenched. If this gets out, it could make me look human, I offered. Accountable? Capable of growth? Silence. Then the founder reached for the pen. Tanner stared at him. Dad, the signature is not for the public, his father said quietly. It's for the record, so that the people who fix this mess aren't blamed for causing it. Slowly, stiffly, Tanner signed. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't glamorous. It was necessary. Sometimes the first step to becoming a leader is admitting you weren't one. We worked for hours submitting reports, requesting extensions, drafting corrective action plans. Every now and then, someone from the team would peek in. Hope on their face, fear in their posture. And each time, I gave them updates that were honest, not sugar-coated. By late afternoon, the first automated acknowledgement arrived. Status: under review, enforcement paused pending corrective verification. Not victory, but progress. The founder let out a slow breath and closed his eyes for a second, as if finally releasing a weight he'd been carrying unknowingly. Ellen, he said, voice steady but softer than ever before. I want to formally offer you your position back. Multiple heads snapped toward me, including Tanner's and Sabrina's. I didn't hesitate. Not because I was emotional, but because I was finally clear. No. His eyebrows lifted. Not offended, just curious. I'm building something of my own now, I continued. Something that isn't dependent on other people treating compliance like a nuisance. He nodded slowly, respect growing in the quiet space between us. But, I added, closing the binder, I'll stay on contract until the final review clears. Relief washed through the room. Not because I was saving them, but because they finally understood why they needed saving. As I packed up to leave, Tanner approached. Not with swagger, but with something resembling humility. Ellen, he said quietly, I didn't take any of this seriously. I thought rules just slowed success. I looked at him. Not angry, not triumphant, just honest. Rules don't block success, Tanner. They keep success standing. He nodded, absorbing it. It would take time, but maybe, just maybe, he'd learn. When I stepped outside, the cold air felt different. Not sharp, but clean. I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving in control. Behind me, people were fixing what had been broken. Not because I told them to, but because consequences finally taught them why they needed to. And that was the real message. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes revenge is simply walking away whole.